I was remembering as Kathy was talking, and somebody may correct me on this, but it was when we were doing that program about greatness, we had used a quote of Martin Luther King's, and in which he said, in essence, that it is not everyone's part or destiny to be great, but everyone can be of service. And so I think therein is the seed of generosity, the willingness to be an instrument to provide something, whatever that may be. MLK, as you mentioned, actually he changed his name. He started off being Michael. And both his father, thus the junior, he also changed after they went to Germany. Yeah, and so he is DLK, Dada Lakeraj Kirpalani was his name, and then later on that was changed to become Brahma Baba, meaning the inference there of being a father figure. And so Martin Luther King would have been perhaps 7 years of age in Atlanta when this man started his mission. And no doubt for both of them, it was inspired. And you could say, looking at the context of each person, the circumstances, the culture, etc., that they were responding to a scenario of limitation or of injustice, etc. And so we all know the Martin Luther King story and what existed in this country, which is unfathomable, you know, in that time in the 50s and the 60s. But in India, it was a situation at one level where in particular, and we don't often think when it comes to discrimination and so on and so forth, that the one aspect of society that has always been discriminated against is women. And so women had only one option, and that was, as teenagers, they had to get married and their spouse was chosen for them and so on and so forth. That was one thing. But as well as that, Brahma Baba was challenging without either marching or doing anything aggressive some of the dearly held beliefs, not only of society, but of the religion in which he grew up. So he challenged the idea of God being a human being, which was what was seen, or the idea of an omnipresent God. I don't think Martin Luther King challenged any part of theology. And of course, one of the differences is that he studied theology and had a degree, a master's in theology. Brahma Baba didn't study any of that. It really was an inspired message that came through him. And both of them were stepping outside of the norms of the culture in which they inhabited. And so, as well as the generosity, I see the first thing would have been their immense courage, because they were ostensibly standing alone, even though they may not have known it at the time. But in a subtle way, we're all connected, and therefore the pure desires of those who saw what righteousness was, or what the human condition should and could be, their energy was giving them, if you like, the ability to be the front person, to be the spokesperson at that time. Now, many things in common. Yes, as Kathy mentioned, that Martin Luther King was inspired by Gandhi, who in turn had been inspired by, what was his name? Tolstoy. But the whole idea, and that was in relation to a social convention in terms of non-violence as a means of trying to achieve what you wanted to achieve. Non-violence is very much a part of traditional Hindu Buddhist philosophy. And I think that it's sometimes something that is overlooked, and that by its very nature is full of generosity. And the inherent generosity within non-violence, and I think is the first quality of generosity in any situation, is that of respect. That's the beginning. Because when you look at those situations of racism, of discrimination and all of that, then, fine, that's how they appeared. But that was the result. What was it the result of? It was the result of arrogance, of greed, of selfishness, of fear, of ignorance. What else? Wasn't it the result of all of those things? So we just look at it and see it for what it was. People, with violent faces beating other human beings. But the precursor to all of that were the things, the thoughts, the attitudes, the learned responses in people's hearts. And then that was the manifestation. And so non-violence, as I understand it, the foremost aspect of non-violence and the foremost aspect of generosity is respect. And that means respect for oneself, self-respect. Otherwise there's envy, there's jealousy, there's all of those games. Respect for others, in other words, allowing them to be who they are and what they were designed to be. Respect for animals, respect for nature, even for inanimate objects. Respect for the space that you inhabit. Do you keep it clean? Do you take care of things? Respect for the body that you inhabit. Do you take care of that in the way that is best suited to the life that you're living? And so then respect, I think, is very much a key aspect of generosity. One thing is, when we think of generosity, we often think of it in terms of material things, what I can give. I remember once someone referring to a businessman. This was a situation that happened here. One person was a lawyer, not a very successful one, and he referred to the business person and said, well, it's easy for him to put his hand in his pocket. And at that time I realized the reason that it's easy for him to put his hand in his pocket is because he's always easily put his hand in his pocket. Whereas when I have that consciousness that I'm not successful, I'm not able to afford it, then there's a reticence in terms of generosity or in being able to give. And yet, generosity will almost like ensure that you won't lack. And so the generosity, fine in terms of material things, but first it's a generosity in relation to one's own self, which will automatically allow me to be generous in relation to other people. And I don't mean in terms of an exchange of things, but an acceptance of who they are and what they are bringing. And where I see how I can decide whether this transaction is going to be positive or negative. And I saw a situation with myself yesterday, and wherein I chose to challenge someone, and so instantly that energy, that it's a friction that you create. You're deciding what kind of energy. Is it something that's going to be fluid and flow, or it's going to be full of friction? And what happens? The other is certainly no longer feeling peaceful. And what about you? What gets affected in you? What gets affected?
Reaction. Your reaction.
Well, you're the one that initiated the action.
Resistance.
You initiated the action, sorry?
Resistance.
No, I think what gets affected is your conscience. Your conscience instantly tells you, you did the wrong thing. You misbehaved. That was not appropriate. That was not kind. It was not generous. In other words, all of those human frailties that were mentioned, you take any one of them, however extreme or in whatever form, and the key element they lack is generosity. And so when I'm being irritated, am I being generous? You know, fine, I may not be violent, I may not hit anyone or curse anyone, but if I get irritated, can I say I'm non-violent? Can I say I'm being generous at that point? And so this for me is what this one has been the instrument to show me how to draw energy from God to change the interactions with human beings so as to erase my own deficit and to accumulate in my account of generosity. In other words, that there's always something that I have to be able to provide to another just in looking, just in seeing, right? Whereas the other thing that every time that and I know it, where there's even that small thing of irritation, annoyance, what else do we do? Tell me some of the other things we do.
When we're stressed, we can be...
When you're stressed, yeah, the same thing, that you behave in a way that you're not very pleased with in your own self. And there is this game of accumulation. So what am I accumulating? In which account? Where am I accumulating? Is it for the good, or is it detrimental to me and to others? And so this then is where both of them were inspired by God, right? No question about it. And the gift, the legacy that this one provided me and many like me is with the ability to change my way of seeing, to change my way of being, and to move towards, rather than the human frailties or even just moral qualities, because moral qualities, you know, morals can change in any society or at any time, as we have all seen, but it's about a spiritual way of being that is eternal and that does not change. And so within that is the first consciousness of oneself as an eternal being, which means that I have the potential to be unlimited. And so rather than the heart that has been hurt, the heart that has been deceived, the heart that is holding not only the things from my own life, but from my people's life, from my tribe's life, or whatever, being able to find a way to merge that, to almost like, and people may not be happy with this idea, to disown it. I no longer wish to keep ownership of this thing because it is no longer serving me or where it is that I want to go. And you're creating space to allow the energy of the divine to come in. And so it's not just about lauding this one or that one, and that's often what it comes down to, but to what extent am I able to, we were speaking about him yesterday as a visionary, And for both men, even as Martin Luther King said, I've seen the promised land, and I don't doubt him. I have too. I don't intend to die tomorrow, though. Right. But seeing it not maybe in the way that he saw it, but now the energy, and this one also not just shared the vision, but showed us how to live the vision. And so it's not about getting somewhere. It's about creating that somewhere. It's about creating it here and now so that it keeps moving into our orbit, if you like. And in this way, that for both men, they had the vision, but their vision was so powerful and profound that it didn't matter that in their lifetime that the vision did not fully manifest. We do see the result for both of them of some aspect of improvements and of the vision. But that now what we're challenged with is to take up the vision and to become the vision and to become the visionary. And so back to this idea of generosity, that's what we're now being called on to do, to be generous, but to draw your energy from that purest source, that in which you don't have to pay back or anything else, and that then you can freely give, because it's about freedom. And there's a big connection between freedom and generosity. Either you're being generous or you're economizing. And so the difference, I'm economizing, I can't afford it. I can't afford to give you my time. I can't afford to give that person any more love or any more respect or regard. And so generosity, the intellect doesn't come into play. The intellect keeps the accounts. You know, you did this much, you deserve that much. But the heart that's able to merge doesn't count. The heart's allowed to do what it's supposed to do, which is to give, which is to be generous. I'll leave it there.